On behalf of Chairman Colby, I'd like to welcome you all here. He's apologetic that he is sick and will not be able to attend today. So welcome once again to Newbury, and let's pledge to the flag and I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And usually the chair should turn it over to Melissa at this point.
Depends which chair.
Yeah.
Some chairs like to take it. JR would normally just say, and it's up to you, Marissa.
Yes, well, as I was not expecting to chair this, I would say it's up to you, Brian.
All right. So the meeting minutes are in the packet from our November 14th. Meeting notes, I'm sorry. I'll call it minutes, official minutes. Any thoughts or comments, you can certainly note them and edit them and bring them back. It'll be pretty straightforward.
I have no comment because I did not attend that meeting.
And neither do I. For the same reason.
We'll assume those are okay. So just to note now that we're on camera, so Marissa is coming. It's the Pine Grove concert this evening. So depends on what order events happen or when they perform. So we think she'll be here sometime between 7 and 7:15. So the regional agreement proposed changes from the last meeting.
I hope we can be done all the time.
Yes. And would she be sad? I will let her decide. I hope that she would be sad. So from the last meeting, we made edits. I created a completely clean copy. Actually went back in, and that document had been edited and tracked and changed and redlined so many times that there were a couple tweaks that actually I found where when I accepted the changes, the text had corrected correctly, it didn't make sense. So it was mostly just grammatical, making it make sense because there was a missing meander of preposition, what have you. The only thing that did change is there was the question that actually was brought up by the Newbury Selectmen in regards to to an addendum to the agreement for any outside. So if you look in that language, so you have two in your packet. You've got a red line, and then you've got a clean copy. So
I have two clean copies, I don't have the red line.
So it should
There's
be
one in
a
front
couple
of that.
packets here.
No, it's two copies.
This one's kind of red in it.
Oh, that one. Oh, there it is.
So are we looking at the clean copy?
So if you're looking at the red line, just to make sure there's not any changes, because this literally went back through, and I had Patty, who's since retired, already enjoying her retirement. She literally went back in, fresh Word document, and made the edits after we corrected everything, and went back and changed all the things that we changed to make sure we had a clean red line with all the changes. So if you look at, there aren't any page numbers.
Section number?
Section 5, I guess it's the end of B. No, that's not it. Yeah, so it's 5D. Nope, it's, well, 5C or D.
Approval
what
of
it is.
budget by member towns? No?
A portion
No,
of
it's a portion of capital operating costs. So that's where that we had talked about other ways of assessing capital, because we had talked about Salisbury taking back ownership of SES and all those. And so in an original, I think it was a Christopher Farmer era, he had struck some language, and then we put in that addendum and said we basically agree that. So in there at the beginning, I just basically put in capital language to reflect what we do now. Each member town's share of the capital cost for improvements at the middle and high school shall be apportioned by determining each town's total portion of the total student enrollment as of October 1st or the 30th, and then there is no other reference to any other changes. We are doing everything as we always have. If in the future we come to an agreement on a landlord-tenant agreement in regards to the a change about the ownership of Salisbury, then we would take that forward at that point. Obviously, we know that the alternative assessment is gonna be tied to that in regards to a future discussion. So other than that, I don't think there should be anything in there that's shocking. It's basically the document that you each approved, each of the boards of selectmen and some finance committees took action to say, we approve this. School committee approved it in November. We actually, Marissa and I got an email from Michelle something. She's a newer liaison of the Department of Ed, working with Christine Lynch, who has been around at the Department of Ed and dealing with regional issues for decades. So the next step is that the department reviews this. So we've been saying to the department, look, this is minor, right? This is tweaks, this is semantics, quite honestly, in clarifying some things that just weren't clear. They first said, oh, we'll take a look at that and get it back to you in a few days. Today they clarified that it has to go through legal before a school committee vote. So what we're waiting to hear is each of the town, because technically, remember, the boards of selectmen, that's not part of this process.
Mhm.
The process is school committee votes, town meetings vote, commissioner approves, right? That's the process. So she re-explained the process of the boards of selectmen as a nod of, we've been part of this process. The committee voted again, same thing, to say, we agree this is good changes. She said it can take up to 3 months for DESI legal to review it. So our question was, okay, when is that, when you say before the committee can vote, that DESI legal has to review it? Is that a final vote? So can we proceed on our course where we were saying we would be doing these meetings and getting people's information in the spring, town meetings happening in late April, May, and then the committee could take a final vote in June and then send it off to the commissioner? If that's the case, then the commissioner basically has all of December, January, February into March before we would be sending anything to anyone and have an oops moment. So we're having, hopefully that's what they're gonna clarify. I think that's what the understanding is. Cause all we're doing in moving forward is we're moving forward in good faith, sharing information with the towns. We had actually talked about last year, we did budget forums in and through the towns. In each town, we just went out and answered questions for anyone that was interested. We did one in the afternoon, one in the evening in each town. We were thinking, let's do the same thing this year, make it both a budget and a regional agreement. Any questions about the budget, any questions about the regional agreement? So those 6 meetings, 2 in each town, one afternoon, one evening, we're scheduling those in good faith, assuming everything is okay. So as long as that all makes sense, and DESI says yes, it's really that final vote. The school committee can't approve it formally until DESI has reviewed it. As long as that cadence works, then we're still all set to go to town meetings in April, May. I think the standard response from DESI is, yeah, we need 3 months to review it in a legal team. I get it if you're writing a new regional agreement. I get it if you're changing a formula or changing ownership of facilities. I mean, there's really nothing exciting here. I don't think any attorney's gonna look at it and say, no way. So that's where that's at. I'm hopeful it will still move forward and we can get a small victory in kind of cleaning up the semantic language here, and then continue to move forward in the discussion on the 2 more substantive changes.
Would be nice
It would be nice.
to make some progress with all
It would
this
be
stuff.
nice.
And I really would like, it would make me really not happy if it couldn't make Springtown meeting.
Yeah. Yes, we made that very clear to the department. And again, they're so understaffed that they tend to be very understanding when whether it's a commissioner making a decision or associate commissioner with licensure issues. When you actually talk to the person, like, okay, yeah, well, we can move that along. It's just the fact that everyone's new. Literally 40, 50, 60% of the department is brand new because everyone retired. They did an early retirement 2-3 years ago. So half the department went off to bigger and better things. So, yeah, so that is where we are at. That makes sense. I think and hope we're still on track. But certainly by the next meeting, we would be able to give you hopefully a clear, at least here's what DESI's, and we can actually follow through. This isn't a public body, so as far as open meeting law and everything, when we get a response from DESI, we can blast that response out to the full DCC listserv as well.
Yeah, I mean, and even if you guys, if the can't vote, as long as we can get it out to the voters with enough time to read it and ask questions about it, when the vote happens is kind of immaterial as long as it's
Well,
before
does it-
town meeting.
Does it have to happen? I think the school committee does have to vote on it before it comes before town meeting.
Yes, that has to
Correct.
happen.
Yeah.
So as we have that window, if, I'm hoping they're gonna say, before school committee approves it, they need to review it legally. So even if it really does take 3 months, and that's all of December, January, and February, the school committee could take it up at either the March meeting or the April meeting, right? The first meeting is the end of April, that's the earliest. Late April, early May, late May.
When's that? We're in the end of April, I think.
Oh, we would have to have it into the warrant.
Yeah.
We're right, but I'm saying
Yeah,
when
we
the
have to
town
be
meeting
in the
happens.
warrant, that's the, so
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking.
So this is ready for the warrant, right? I mean, we're
Yes,
saying,
that's what I was saying.
So
We
yes,
can bring that forward, start talking to people about it.
so this is ready to go
Put
and
it on
say,
the warrant,
Yes.
and we could just, just to get it out to print.
Yep.
So we could just move no action if we can't.
Yes, the school
Exactly.
committee hasn't voted on it.
Yep.
Okay,
so I would
John.
say, so what's the earliest and the latest? I mean, we have the documents ready now, so we can just submit these to towns to say, through whatever
Yes.
your clerk and whoever the process is, to say, this is what we wanna put forward. Hopefully DESI, comes through, and if within 3 months they approve it, committee could take a formal vote, right, then that would be after DESI's review. And my guess is that would be by March, but at the absolute latest, the April meeting is the second week, and I think it's the last week of April, the first week of May, and the third week of May of the 3 town meetings. So that's.
But I know we have to get it in for printing and we have to have, the meeting is, town meeting is early.
Right, but we can get that in now, because the paperwork, what's going in is done. This is just the formal vote of the school committee to put it, so that as long as that vote happens before that discussion happens on the town meeting floor, that's my understanding is it should be all good.
So we don't want to, we're not going to work on the red line fact sheet, we're just gonna work on the clean copy.
Clean copy is basically the red copy just taken on the, yeah.
Yep,
So,
so,
we can give that to Debbie for the warrant.
After school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess.
so yeah, I guess that's a question, I don't know how each town puts things on their warrants differently, but, it could go on the warrant, you know, and again, this is not my area of expertise. I know there's language that goes on the warrant, and then there's materials that support it. I don't know if the whole regional agreement becomes part of the warrant, if the regional
No,
agreement.
we just put the edits in usually, or that's what we do. I don't
Okay.
know what-
That would make sense. If you pull out any edit, change the answer, clarify something.
That's what we do for our bylaws.
That would make sense. So then it would just be literally, each town would decide how they kind of cut and paste, but you have the cleanest, and we can get this, we sent it electronically, we can send it again just to make sure you have this, which is completely edited, no markup, and then the red line version, which reflects every single change down to a period or a missing T. That this and the original 2006 agreement.
Sounds good.
Sound like a plan?
We,
Yeah. So, I'll just keep going. So the fiscal 21 budget development, we still have, again, as I mentioned last month, I think we met only a couple weeks ago, we met in Salisbury. It continues to be, as I mentioned 3 weeks ago, we're in the middle of negotiations, there is no clarity there. Special education continues to be a wild card. We're bidding all of our transportation, take that back, we're bidding our regular yellow bus transportation. Our special education transportation, we've actually been under contract with NRT for 13 years now, and they've been raising our vans $1 per day, because they do a lot of collaborative work with all the collaborators in the district town, so they give us good rates on the special ed vans. They're competitive on the yellow buses. So that is going out to bid. As we mentioned last month, Michelle Cresta's last day was also November 30th. She started this past Monday in Marblehead, bless her soul. And so we have Dave Jack, who's a former business manager, former superintendent, in on an interim basis, also working with Amy Posick, who's our treasurer. We've got the bid specs. Michelle had them ready to go, didn't get them out the door before she left with everything else she had to do. So those will be going out in the next week or so, due after the holidays. So by the time the committee has our first budget workshop, which is Saturday the 20-somethingth. It's the Saturday the 25th. So that Saturday, January 25th workshop is the first time the committee sits around the table with requests from principals, from the special ed director, from facilities director, technology director, and sees what the requests are, sees what the kind of the sunk costs are. We will have bids in hand by then. So we may not have executed a contract, but we will know who the lowest bidder is, and barring some crazy ordeal, we have a very good sense of what the cost for transportation will be. I'm hopeful we'll get other bidders, but we haven't. This has been an ongoing discussion, you know. Senator Tarr appointed me to the big long commission name on efficiencies in school transportation, and we spent a lot of time talking about green vehicles and a lot of things that really are awesome but aren't going to save money. If anything, you know, $850,000 bus is not the best solution. But one of the things we've been, my request, and I'm hoping it makes it into the final report, is we currently have a requirement to transport all students. We receive state transportation, and so we can't charge for buses. I'm not a big fan of fees, and so I wouldn't want to charge for buses anyway. However, we're required to hold a seat open for everyone. So if someone decides they want to ride in the spring, Betty Boop still has a seat on the bus because you know, we plan for every student that's eligible to ride the bus, which is everyone. One of the recommendations was looking at the requirements, the legal requirements in statute and regulation that would allow us to say to parents, okay, you just need to let us know by August 15th. If you want to opt into bus transportation for the year, obviously you have a right, but if you're not going to, and you want to give up that seat, if you opt out, you don't have a right to opt back in. Of course, we probably could figure it out if someone needed to do that, but just allowing that vehicle to say, no pun intended, that legal vehicle to say, okay, I'm going to opt out. If 300 kids opt out because we know they're being dropped off by parents every day anyway, we could, I mean, that's roughly 55 big kids fit on a bus and up to 77 little kiddos. So, I mean, that we could trim 1, 2, 3 bus routes and not have really long routes, and you know, you're talking about $60,000, $70,000 per route. So hopefully those efficiencies take root, and that's not going to be something that's going to change for next year. But that report is due out now. I haven't seen a draft of it yet, so we'll see what happens with that. My guess is after the holidays. But one of the biggest things we talked about is there's no competition for busing. There's, you know, we were a Salter company or a Salter district for, John Salter was a Triton grad, and then handed the reins off to Steve Gadd, and they just can't be competitive with John McCarthy and NRT because he owns something like, I'm not way off, but it's like 1,000 buses and 1,800 vehicles, and he literally buys fuel for his vehicles at the dock in Boston. So I mean, when you're buying in that kind of quantity, yeah, no one can compete with you. So we will assume a couple people will show their interest when we bid that, and then when push comes to shove, and January 15th or whatever, when we open the bids, there'll be one player sitting at the table, and that'll be the price we pay.
So if I'm gonna go back to the bus routes for a second, because I know my kids had cars and they could drive themselves into school. So while they were doing that, you still held to seat for them on the bus?
We have to.
For every eligible kid?
So it's buses. So if you were eligible to ride a bus, which we then, so as a
The entire
region,
year? I mean.
yeah.
So if, like, my kids they took the bus, I mean, they drove it, but if something happened, the car was in the shop, they could get on the bus.
So that's the question. Then. Yes. So right
Or a
now,
snowy day and you don't want them to drive.
exactly. So the reality is, a lot of people would plan for that and say, I want to opt in for the year, right? Because there's no cost. There are a lot of people that will never set foot on the bus for various reasons, good, bad, or otherwise.
Right. The bus is where it all happens, but anyways.
Just saying, you know, we all rode buses before.
Right.
A long time ago. So I think that there's going to be there's going to be a kind of what's the word of a variance, you know, a kind of a scale from absolutely I'm riding every day to I will never ride the bus. Of course I'll opt out. But even those kids who say, you know, I'm not going to ride the bus, but on a snow day and there's an extra 50 kids getting on buses, in all likelihood we can fit them on, right?
Okay.
Go ahead, hop on. It wouldn't be a bus route for them, but if the bus is going by and they want to walk down the street to a bus route, yeah. it's very rare that we have buses packed
Yeah, you
out.
could put 3 in a seat if you had to, but just 1 or 2.
Yeah, when you hear a 77 passenger bus, that's with 3 to a seat. Which you know is great for a first grader, but those high school boys, put 3 of them in a seat and you've got problems.
But did you kind of try this when you were trying to save the late buses and, I mean,
We tried to trim a route, not rule any riders out.
but wouldn't that be the same, essentially, it was a different title, but wouldn't it essentially be the same? I mean,
No, because
you
we
start off at
absorbed,
the beginning of the year with the kind of kids and you end up, like the buses by the end of the year probably half full.
yeah, so we didn't ask people to opt out. We just tried to reroute, call it 500 kids at Salisbury. We tried to reroute those 500 kiddos on one less bus. So it wasn't taking any kids out of seats. It was just trying to replace them and rework it so we could do it with one less bus.
Changing bus stops and routes that way, so that everybody was still picked up, just with one less.
Right, but my guess is if you were opting out, you weren't opting out then too. I mean, you weren't throwing a kid on the bus. If you're gonna opt out, you weren't throwing a kid on the bus last year when you were trying to figure out how to manage this and you still got complaints that it's too many kids.
We've never opted out before,
Right,
because we can't.
but, so you tried this last year to save the bus, squeeze all the kids,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, get rid of a route, which is essentially the same thing, you're trying to get rid of a route and try to put more kids on the bus. I don't think you're gonna get any more or less kids on the bus or not. I think you'll still have the same kids that you had last year, same number of kids that you had last year.
Because the people that are driving them are driving them
Right,
already.
right, and they were
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's just a budget thing. If you are required to have the seats open, and you know that they're not filled, you know, I know my buses were never filled as a kid, then if, you know, whatever, 7% of people say they're not gonna actually use the bus and are willing to say formally, then you can, you know, get rid of the bus, save some money.
It may not, right, it may not pan out.
Right.
I think it would also, if we were gonna do that from the get-go, we would be able to say, okay, whatever, we have 2,500 students, now we have 2,200 students. Rerouting via software would look very different, because it would be more efficient than what we were trying to do at the 11th hour, which was trying to kind of come up to a conclusion to save some money and bring back the late bus, and it was just too much, too little, too late.
I would guess you'd need a way to opt back in too, because, you know, if the kid crashes the car and there's no car for the rest of the year.
Which is why people are probably not even gonna opt out, cause they're gonna think, you know, that could happen. It's free, it's not gonna cost me anything if I say opt in or opt out, I might as well say opt in. And
Well, yeah, unless it's presented as the, you know, this could save the district money, which then goes back into your education money, or does it, because how much of it is covered by the state?
Not enough.
So we'll get about 80% of the cost of transporting students outside a mile and a half. So, so we transport all students, even those within a mile and a half, because as you know, in our towns, we don't have any sidewalks. So, say, take the sidewalk to school, it doesn't work. And we have a school on Route 1 in Salisbury, 1A in Raleigh.
I was a quarter of a mile in elementary school, it's narrow, like my kid walked
Right.
to school.
So we actually lose out reimbursement because those kids that live inside a mile and a half are not reimbursable. We transport them at no additional cost because we're driving by them with seats available anyway, so we pick them up. So that's a kind of a moral, ethical decision that the committee has made. No, we lose a little bit of money, not anything groundbreaking. But you know, 80% is the transportation reimbursement for this year, ballpark. And you know, on $1.2 million, it's a decent amount of money. If we were to save 100,000, 200,000, so we save 100,000, maybe we get 80 of that back. So it's not, we're getting the money, it's not a complete wash. But it'd be a huge, it's not a huge savings. The problem is after 7 months of hearings and everything that we've done, 8 months, there's no savings. I mean, you can't even find drivers, let alone find savings. So you pay drivers more to get them in the door.
It must be kind of hard with rural roads, though. I mean, if you have 2 or 3 people opt out, you think, wow, I'm gonna be able to cut that route, there'll be 1 down the end, and you're gonna run the road anyway. So it must be really hard to change things.
Yes, and on this commission is some folks from Western Mass, and wow, we think we have complications. Was it Mohawk? It's 158 square miles. And
Those
there's,
kids must ride the bus for hours.
there's 712
And
kids,
there's a
pre-K
law, it
through,
can't be more than an hour.
technically, but if you can't get there in less than an hour, it doesn't
It is
matter.
what it
It
is.
goes out
also
the window.
law of
Yeah.
physics,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, it's,
it
yeah,
trumps
it's,
state law
it's-
every time.
it's unbelievable, yeah. So, yeah, so all that to say, you know, that we've got some wild cards in the budget. By January 25th, when the committee meets for that workshop, we'll have much more concrete numbers on the table. Hopefully the negotiating subcommittee will have had some discussion about compensation enough to be talking about a ballpark figure that we're gonna at least use for budgeting. It's always an interesting strategy to put money in a budget, but not show your cards when you're negotiating, so, that's.
What's the
always-
date for the elementary schools to present their budgets to the school?
So it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Or you're going back to Monday?
I think we'll go back to Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, well, yeah, wait a minute, no, we went to Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Hang on a second. It's currently listed at. It's currently listed Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We have to look at that, cause that was, we had moved to Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday,
Right.
and then we trimmed the day last year because we had a much more confined process. And I think when the calendar, excuse me, got made, we added that day back to the Monday rather than adding it to the Thursday. So I will clarify, so that's the week of, January 13th.
13,
So you're still meeting Monday nights.
right.
And Tuesday nights is tough, because you all meet
The second and the fourth.
the second and the fourth, and that would be,
And that would be the second.
that'd be the second.
Oh.
And we're gonna do that later, and we can't do that later because then we're into,
Bump into the calendar.
then we'll bump it into, we need enough weeks to process a budget. So I'll clarify, but it is that week of the 13th as it's currently posted. Any other thoughts or questions about the budget?
I think Brian, right now, according to, because I have mine linked to Triton, we only have them scheduled on the 14th and 15th.
Yeah.
That Tuesday, Wednesday, we don't have that Monday, or that Thursday.
Oh, I guess, I'm not sure what I was looking at. I don't have that either, thank you.
So you do have it set for the 14th?
So it's currently Tuesday and Wednesday.
Can you get through all 5 schools and the athletics and everything else in 2 nights?
No, so I think last year we did, because again, last year was, we kind of took a pause and, you know, realizing the kind of year that we'd had the previous year. We went in with this is a status quo regardless of what happens, budget, and so the process was much more confined. I think in working with school councils and school committees and lots of discussions, the process is the school councils are a statutory structure within a school where parents and teachers and principals have an opportunity to say, this is what we need to have an effective school. So we need to have that voice back in to say, here's the need. So we need to add that Thursday back, because no, to give full credit, we can't do all 3 in 2 nights. We also have pulled apart the school improvement plans, which used to make it much longer. We've been having discussion about adding that back into the process. Doesn't necessarily need to be with the budget, but we're thinking it'd be a fall. And then that would feed the budget process that starts, 2-3 months later. But yes, we do need 3 nights. Absolutely.
On to the state advocacy update.
So I will
Do it.
I will not do nearly as good a job as Marissa. So here's a document that she actually put together. So in summary, the Student Opportunity Act was passed by both branches of the legislature. It was signed into law by Governor Baker on November 26th. If anyone had the opportunity to go on the state news, the State House News Service, and watch the signing celebration, it was maddening at best. So it was the usual players touting this massive success, this massive windfall for education in Massachusetts. Daily News picked up a story, Christian Wade's or someone's, Amanda Getchell's or someone picked up a story out of Boston and ran, huge windfall for Massachusetts schools. Fine, carry that in Boston, that's not a story in this neck of the woods. There was another follow-up 2 days later, just, is there good news? Yes. As far as Chapter 70, we will get no more money in Chapter 70 each year than we've been getting right now. So we're gonna get that $30 minimum per pupil, which is roughly what we've been getting right now. There is money for regional transportation, not regional transportation, for special education transportation. It's adding out-of-district special education transportation to an out-of-district, each student's out-of-district tuition. And when it takes them to that threshold, that then becomes reimbursable through circuit breaker. In addition to that, remember we was talking about that threshold of when they start reimbursing. With the Student Opportunity Act, that threshold was gonna jump significantly by $20,000, $15,000 over 6 years, which would have meant that $15,000 per student we lose in reimbursement. I had written a white paper back in March. Had a lot of discussion that with Jason Lewis came up to Salisbury and that gained traction. So that's now, they've kind of flatlined that threshold and put an inflationary factor on it rather than foundation. So that could, if literally the perfect scenario, using last year's figures, over the course of 4 years, that could give us up to $400,000 more per year in circuit breaker reimbursement. In all likelihood, it's probably more like 65, 75,000. Our circuit breaker, say again?
A little bit of a swing.
A little bit of a swing, right? And that's not an uncommon fluctuation just based on reimbursement. So for this year, we have a massive uptick for 2 students of $317,000 that we're having to cover in this year's budget. We're gonna get 75% reimbursement on those costs in next year's budget. So we have to cover it this year, but then call it roughly 2.25 of it we get back next year. So it's unlike Chapter 70 where you can say it's gonna go by inflationary factor, it's a hit or miss figure. So is it positive? Of course, it's new dollars. We always want new dollars. But from a statewide education funding perspective, we got absolutely nothing out of this. I think Marissa did a nice job in a 2-pager kind of explaining the impacts for Triton. The key, the bold in that first paragraph is this is not an appropriations bill. This is legal structure. So this provides language that is also subject to appropriation. So the $1.4 billion that is required to fund this has not been appropriated and has not been determined how it will be appropriated. But I think that by both branches and the governor signing this, there's certainly a signal that this is going to get done. Is it going to get done as well as they're hoping? We'll see. But it's, I think there's also the game going on. The fiscal 19 supplemental budget has been floating around the State House for what, 4 months now, 5 months. The comptroller is going to shut it off by next Wednesday and say, okay, if you guys can't play nice, I'm just putting it all in the rainy day fund. I don't think there's a lot of people that mind that, because that puts $1 billion into the rainy day fund. That come budget time, they know they've got that money available to start working with. So we'll see how that game goes. But there's some other notes in here in regards to the studies that got codified. One of them is, and I keep saying this over and over again, people keep calling this ed reform. It's not ed reform. People keep calling it Chapter 70 reform. It's not Chapter 70 reform. This is foundation reform, which is the first step. This is what it should cost to educate students. The second step, the piece we keep fighting about, is a town's ability to pay how much it costs to educate students. So in the study, section 20 carried a requirement for Department of Labor, Department of Revenue, Division of Local Services, and the Department of Ed by the spring, or by December, is that one? But that was the spring, I think.
outages and stuff.
Yeah, by March of 2020. So that's, I mean, we'll see. There's lots of opinions. Julie Kelly, formerly of MASC, I guess currently not right now, is brilliant on this topic, and I think understands it better than Roger Hatch, and has identified some real weak links in the aggregate assessment that we keep talking about.
I made a copy of that and sent to Thomas Osby, so
Okay.
it was really interesting.
Yeah, and I've got copies of it if anyone wants to see that. If you really want to dig into the weeds, Julie Kelly will take you there.
But it's only a couple pages and just kind of explaining like aggregate wealth versus, or income versus median income, and what even the difference that would make if we just changed the word median income. So it was an interesting read.
Yeah, so it's good information. Hopefully people are listening. But that's another potential that if they recalculated a town's ability to pay, then that would certainly impact Chapter 70. The potential downswing here, and I believe she called out, it's that bold in the third paragraph down. So the foundation budget is again, it's that amount that it should cost. It's the third paragraph on the front page. If one or two towns have significant increases. So that minimum local contributions to a city, the city of Newburyport, means absolutely nothing because they're spending so far above this, right? We've had this discussion so many times. In a region, because we don't have an alternative assessment. Get that little plug. It's the first step in calculating your assessments. So if Newbury's minimum local contribution goes through the roof, and Raleigh's and Salisbury's doesn't, then Newbury's assessment is gonna be out of whack with everyone else's. So that was what happened last year, why Salisbury had $1 million increase. Again, hopefully that was the equalization, but Lord knows what's gonna happen now, because they're redefining foundation. So that has, over 7 years, foundation spending, or the required spending is gonna go up. And that will absolutely have an impact on the assessments. How? No one will say yet, because no one will take a stab at inflationary factors and equalized valuations and median incomes. So there's the sunk language, as far as Chapter 70, doesn't give us any more money than we ever had, in summary. We'll get a little more in special education, circuit breaker reimbursement, and there's some good language about some studies that could impact Triton in the future. We remain hopeful.
What about regional transportation reimbursement?
Nothing in here required any changes to that.
I thought that went up and there was a gradual increase of 72 to 75 and then up to 80.
Bruce did that, didn't he?
Yeah.
Those were, but not in, it doesn't require, because it's not part of, it's a separate funding. So that was in the, I mean, yes, he always proposes that, love Bruce. And in the supplemental budget for fiscal 19, that's out of there as a circuit breaker money. But as far as regional transportation being codified in any way in this, it did not. Actually, she said it on camera and believes strongly, Alice Peisch, who's part of the commission, believes strongly that regions shouldn't get transportation reimbursement. Blatantly, over and over again, states that.
Even though it's statute.
She thinks the statute should change. Yeah. So she, Adam Hines, who represents literally 54, literally the western third of the state has one senator. It's Adam Hines. Covers a lot of regions, so he understands a little more. But the discussion around that table was, well, there's other Chapter 74, there's other reimbursements to towns that are required by statute, and they're just never funded. So why should you get yours if I'm not getting mine? So we had that debate, thankfully not on camera. And it came down to a discussion about it was an incentive to regionalize. Right, and I think they said this at the Salisbury meeting, joking, like, it's hard having 3 towns sit around a table, and this is great, but it's hard to get 3 towns. Try to get 14 towns around the table. So there's gotta be some incentive to the table to get people for the efficiencies of only having one meet, and only one business manager, and only one, all of that. So, doesn't see it that way. So if there's a lot of people that if they had their way.
Where is she at?
Wellesley.
Should we just make sure she doesn't get reelected?
Yeah, good luck with that. Yeah, and I get it, you know, these towns that have huge tax bases, the Student Opportunity Act passed because you have these towns with huge tax bases that have incredible need next to unbelievable wealth, but they can afford the difference. So they're gonna say, yeah, we don't need that money. Big cities, the gateway cities need it. $99 million more for Boston. I don't know. I think Boston's got some decent tax base going on over there.
Got any more good news?
Yeah, let's wrap this up before Narissa comes in.
In 2020
I'm always a Debbie Downer, she'll be more positive.
2020 is when they're gonna look at that rural school district?
So that's a study, they have to have that by December 2020, so that's a year from now. So it's rural and regional schools, it's not, the exact language speaks more to about declining enrollment, and so that's a need, and that's a piece that Julie Kelly's done some work on that as well, that when you have a formula that's purely based on enrollment, again, we keep talking about this, costs don't go down commensurate with with the numbers of students.
Right.
Exactly, there is a correlation, absolutely, but it doesn't go down student for student. You know, you can't save money on 3 students in your district. So that study is required.
So do you know when they're gonna start, who will be in charge of that study, when they're gonna start putting together people, I mean, who's gonna take it off?
So my guess is, for the regional in rural, the way they've generally done it is the governor gets appointments, the majority and minority leaders in the House and Senate. So Bruce would have, my guess, is an appointment.
Brad Hill?
Brad Hill, so for the transportation, Brad nominated himself, Bruce nominated me. Bruce asked me to do it again, I would do it, and if there are other regions in the area that wanna get involved, more than happy to show the love. But it's an important discussion,
It's important who sits at that table.
absolutely. So,
I'm a big fan.
Is this on the Triton website or any place?
this is not, I think, no, she just finished this, this afternoon and shared it, said, give me copies before I get there, so.
Okay.
So we'll get this, and then actually, the stuff that you mentioned from Julie Kelly, and get that around to the whole group. Because there's 2 pieces, one's a little more dense than the other, but if you stick with it, it's, as I said, she's brilliant and she gets it, so.
I think there was only one I was able to really wrap my head around, the other one I was like, whoa, I
Yeah.
don't understand this, I'm done.
Yeah, and there's a buddy of hers, I forget his name. He came up with this alternative way to calculate assessments, and it's brilliant, but
Didn't fly.
remember his name? Not
I
Peter
can't think of his
Dinwiddie.
name right now.
But
Didn't
it was,
fly with regions though.
it was literally, it just, people glazed over.
Mhm.
So I think, you know, maybe now's the time to attack that a little more, but it's heady stuff, and I mean, the aggregate assessment, the aggregate wealth came into play in 2008 when they amended the formula, and they were sitting around the table thinking, okay, we need to put a wealth component in there because of towns like the Cape or Salisbury where you've got great equalized valuation, but not huge wealth, and they're like, yeah, aggregate sounds good. I'm simplifying it, but that's basically, they never tested it out because you can't, so now, it's been going on for a decade plus, it's time to reassess it.
Yep.
It's not all it's cracked up to be.
Well, part of the reason I asked about whether or not it was on the web is because people like to check the documents that we talked about when they walk.
Oh, yes. Actually, yes, so on our website, the agenda was posted with everything except for this, but we can absolutely, with the minutes, this will be attached.
Great.
But we'll also get it out to everyone just so you can take a look at it.
Yep.
Share it.
Any other questions on state advocacy?
All right. So the only other thing that we needed to talk about was, I have a question. As far as dates, so we scheduled dates through tonight. Do you want to continue meeting on a monthly basis as we get through budget season? We have a couple weeks on the holidays. You tell me, but I don't know if that it makes sense to have another meeting before we have budget figures. my guess is we would wanna meet after, so we've got the presentations the week of the 13th, the workshop, the 25th, which we also may, depending. It's the third week, so we should have the governor's figures too, so we should have our first look at minimum local contributions, we should have all that. If we were to hold it that following week, the week of the 27th of January, that would be a good time, we'd be able to have a very informed discussion.
The 30th, you thinking?
So Thursdays are best?
Yeah, cause Mondays are out for you.
Yep.
Tuesdays are out for us. Wednesdays are out for the school committee.
Yeah, that night
Okay,
actually, we
Thursday
could do
night.
the 29th that week, we don't have a school committee, because we're meeting the 8th, and then we have a tentative on the 22nd. So if we wanted to do Wednesday the 29th, because I know,
What night is that?
Wednesday the 29th of January.
That'll be fine, that's fine.
So you wanna say Wednesday the 29th?
Wednesday, January 29th.
Where will it be?
So what is the progression then?
I think we're done.
So Salisbury. So we back to Rowland. We did one at Triton, but we'll go, so
Or journey.
just in time.
Sorry.
I don't know, I was probably more Debbie Town than you.
Oh.
I don't know if I did your paper justice.
Does the progression include Triton? I guess it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we should go back to Triton.
Progression, oh, yes. So Triton would be January. And then for February, we'll have met on the 29th. We'll have 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks later from that, we'll do a tentative budget on the 12th. Does it make sense to have a meeting right after that?
Right after the budget.
I mean, it's only 2 weeks later.
Thursday, the 13th, is that right?
Yeah, it's only 2 weeks after the meeting in January,
When
but
is February vacation?
the following
the
week
week
is
after
17th.
that.
But we could do it the 26th, we have the public hearing on the 26th of February. We could do it that Thursday, the 27th. That way, we will have a tentative budget. Some of you, may attend the public hearing, you'll have heard, you may have attended and talked at the public hearing, but then we have a chance to come back around the table, and discuss. So that sounds, I'm seeing lots of nods, so Thursday.
And then it would go where?
27th would go back to
To
Raleigh,
Raleigh.
So that's February?
February 27th, Wednesday 129.
The 29th is supposed to be Raleigh, so why?
No,
No,
it's-
no,
we're
it's
going back to
Triton.
Triton, we were going Triton, Raleigh, Salisbury, Newbury,
So what's the 29th then now?
Triton,
Right.
Oh, it's Triton now, okay.
and then back to Raleigh on Thursday, February 27th.
Okay.
And then I'm assuming, so 2 weeks later, we're finalizing the budget this year on the 11th. Early. So do you want, I don't know if there's a,
Is there a need to meet after that?
There will be, because we'll have regional agreement stuff.
right, but as far as the budget piece, so
Oh,
once the budget's done, then it's, hopefully we've had a couple meetings where we're around the table. But, I mean, I think we could meet later in the month again, and there's no need to meet so soon. So we could go to Thursday, the 26th of March. That work?
And that would be Salisbury.
Salisbury, yeah.
These are all at 6:30, right?
And then to April. You didn't get any further email from Michelle at Tessie, right?
Just that she wants to talk tomorrow afternoon.
Okay.
Live, because she feels like that's easier than trying to email, which I agree.
So I'll explain what we talked about, but, so it would make sense to meet later in April then too. So
But then that would be after their town meeting anyway, and you want it before town meeting, right? Because if it's to wrap up the regional agreement.
Did we set our town meeting yet?
We haven't said it yet, but it'll be the end of April, you think? It'll be before the election.
why don't we say
Yes.
Thursday, April 26th. I'm sorry, April 16th,
It's vacation.
the following week.
Our town meeting will probably be on the 28th. We haven't said it yet.
Okay.
But that's when it will
So
probably.
that's
be.
the week
April.
after April break.
Yeah.
April 16th will be here in Newbury.
And then, wanna do one more in May?
Because our town meeting would be May 4th.
Yeah.
So ours is the 18th of May.
We used to do that.
Town election would be on the 12th.
And then Salisbury meets at the, you guys are the
18th.
latest, yeah.
Yeah, May 18th is ours. Is it your birthday?
Celebrating with you guys.
There you go.
So then do you wanna meet after all the town meetings are done?
I think that makes sense, cause then we'll know if the town's passed everything.
So do you wanna do it the week of the 18th and go like the 21st? That's the
Yeah,
Thursday
because the
before
following,
Memorial
yeah,
Day.
the following week is Memorial Day.
And then, or the Thursday after Memorial Day, I don't know which is better.
And I'll be back to Triton.
Before, I think before is better.
Before, so the 21st,
Oh, May?
May 21 and 25.
Yeah.
Labor Day.
Yeah.
So that's 5 more meetings through the spring.
That's plenty.
Does that work? Maybe we'll stay more.
We can always cancel. I mean, that would always be my hope, right?
So I explained to them about that email from Michelle, and
Oh,
basically,
yes.
the hope is that that formal vote by the committee is the formal one, right? So we all took kind of formative substantive votes that just saying, here's what we wanna do. We've got the documents, we all looked at those. Those can go to town clerks, we can start processing for warrants. If they need 3 months, that would be all of December, January, February.
No, 3 months I was talking about because I sent it to them in the second week of November. And she's talked about coming out with it, I'm guessing, she said that they probably will need January. So I was counting early November to early February as my 3 months.
So even if that-
Hopefully we'd have something, but
Right, so then the committee could re-vote it officially.
yes,
In hopefully March, worst case scenario, April.
Yep.
Cause your meeting is second week of April, first town meeting is 2 weeks later, week and a half later. That way then there's a formal committee vote, Desi reviewed, even though it's been in the process for the warrants for a month and a half. Assuming there's no tweaks from Desi, there's not gonna push it.
well, and I would hope, I mean, she seemed to think that it was Desi's review and then the legal team's kind of, I'm guessing that they're gonna be like finessing against Mass General Law and stuff like that. So I'm thinking anything substantive will come out of the actual Desi policy group.
Gotcha.
That would be my take, but I'll know more tomorrow. I mean, I don't know, you saw all the emails, but I took it as she's new to the job and perhaps hadn't realized the scope of what had to happen,
Yeah.
when she was originally giving us
I
things.
definitely got that sense,
Okay, that it wasn't just me, because
And
we
she
had
definitely
talked
knew.
and.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah.
It's an oh shoot moment.
Yes, that's the way I took it as
Never
well.
had those before. Alright,
So, I think since you're here.
Sorry about that.
You missed the brilliant update.
very
Whoa.
positive.
Wow.
Whoa.
Forward thinking.
Yes.
Jeff was remarking how positive everything seems for Triton.
Did you want to talk about this at all, or are you happy with what you didn't hear Brian say?
I was just gonna say,
What
that's
did
the
Brian
weirdest and most
say?
unfair statement ever.
Well,
I just-
I guess I wanna give you the opportunity to talk about
Yeah.
this, if you would like it.
My main goal was to give you all something to carry back to your boards, given the recent press around the Student Opportunity Act, because it seemed extremely positive. The word windfall was used. And it's not going to be that for us. It's not actually going to be that for most of the districts in this area. They were using, I think, a lot of statewide reporting and pulling it into our local news outlets.
Fake
So
news, fake news.
there you go. It's real for some, just not for us.
Inaccurate is fake.
Yes.
Is
So
there a way for the district to maybe talk about that in the paper?
yes, so Jim already did an interview with me and Justin Bartholomew from Pentucket. but, you know, 2 articles that people saw first versus the
It's
third
just
one
still-
that
it's
came
still
down the
okay.
road.
It's easy to, the state sometimes, you know, appropriations and all that stuff, it's easy
Yeah.
for you to reinterpret what's really happening.
Absolutely, absolutely. My biggest concern is that, you know, we're sitting there in whatever, April or May and saying, well, what did you do with all the money? There was no money.
Yeah.
You know, there was no money to do anything with. So I don't want to get to that point, which is why I wanted to make sure that, I mean, I'm hoping that I'll send this out electronically, but if you can take copies of this, we can make extra copies and just bring it back to your boards so that our finance committees and our boards of selectmen at least all know kind of where we're sitting right now, so that there are no surprises when we really start talking numbers in the spring. And I think the second bold here where I'm trying not to dive too
I
deep
talked,
here.
I
You
talked
did?
about your second bullet.
Okay, alright, so that second bold is there. My main concern is that, you know how there have always been swings in the past where one town has gone up and other towns have gone down, or 2 towns have gone up and 1 town has gone down. My fear is that that has the potential to happen this time as well, because all minimum local contributions are definitely going up. It's going to be whether they go up in sync or whether they go up separately. And we really won't know that until the governor's budget comes out in January. But that's my biggest immediate fear of what could go wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's January 20, whatever, if when House 2, the governor's budget comes out, people are gonna finally realize, oh, it wasn't the windfall kept being promised.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
I mean, that happens every time that there's a huge increase in education funding, and it's always accompanied by a cut somewhere else in education funding, so.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and there's no cut this time, it's just all going to
Different places. I mean, that, to
very
me, that's
specific places.
a cut, because it doesn't come to us.
Right.
If we're not getting any
I would
money.
have to think that a lot of towns would be experiencing the same thing, because overall, a lot of suburban towns, the enrollment is going down, and basically maybe the cities is going up, so there should be a lot of public outcry about this, I would think,
Yeah, one
you know,
would think,
because, what?
one would think.
Yeah, I
I'm
would think-
surprised. if it
Well, there's a lot of
actually
voices in the
happened.
places that are getting all the money, right? So when you've got all those voices and you've got all those votes,
And I read an
But
article in the Globe that's just said, they covered the city of Lynn, and they said that all the money in, you know, that they're gonna have isn't gonna fix their
that was the buildings.
desperate need of their buildings, their schools. I mean, it's gone, I mean, I'm hopeful that something's gonna change, but the need has gone on too long, and I don't think all the money in the world gonna be needed to fix it,
Right.
statewide.
So, I mean, I think this is my take on, I think what's gonna happen down the road, is there are a lot of districts that are spending right above what the state says education should cost you. And there's a split that's set for every single town out there, where the state pays X amount, X percentage, and the town or the district, towns pay X percentage. So ours is 82.5% right now. So the state is 17.5 and we're carrying 82.5. So if they raise the amount that it costs they say it costs to educate a student $4 million, let's say, for a specific district, for most districts, a significant part of that burden is coming back to the towns, and it's forcing them to pay more, and in some cases, significantly more than what they're paying right now.
It sounds like, well, I mean, that sounds like that would happen to us.
It will not happen to
Yeah,
us
it
because
won't.
it's a district where 116% right now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, 116%. So that 16% should give us a buffer, hopefully through the whole 7 years. If not, it will definitely through the beginning years. But it won't for a lot of other towns that are like 3%, 2%, right above. So those first couple of years, you're gonna tack on those $4 million, and maybe the state's coming through with $1 million of that, but the town is having to pay an additional $3 million of that. And that's going to start people freaking out. I mean, that's where the problem is going to come. In one of the other bullets, there's the talk about the MLC, the minimum local contribution study, which is exactly that amount that the town has to put forward compared to what the state has to put forward. So my thinking is that they're setting up recommendations to be in place so that when towns start screaming about having to put all this extra money in and not being able to afford it, then what's going to happen at that point is they're going to have this set of recommendations and won't be able to put through something else legally.
So you're saying that it's not gonna impact Triton School as much now, because this thing says about that we have until the debt is paid off, Triton will not receive any chapter 70 or other minimum aid, so it sounds like we're gonna get hurt with that. I mean,
We won't
Wow.
be helped, but we won't be hurt.
we won't be hurt?
We'll get the $30 per student.
We'll
Just like
get-
we always
Okay, so we'll stay where we are then.
Exactly.
You know.
60,000 or 70,000, 69,000, just like we have every year.
So, but some of those states like Springfield, I think was, I don't know, this is Alicia's number that she always pulls out, was like $94 million over those 7 years.
$95 million.
Yeah.
What we could do for 95 million?
So of that
Granted, they're a little larger
95,
than us,
yeah.
but-
of that 95, I'm sure Springfield, you know, is paying a much lower percentage just because of their local demographics. But even if they're paying 30% of it, telling them that they have to put in another $30 million over those 7 years, and they've probably been pitching in, you know, probably somewhere similar to where we have, like a couple $1 million a year up until this point, that's gonna hurt.
Well, I don't understand how these, and I know it's late, and I don't wanna get into this, but I don't understand how these big cities like Boston and Springfield and Worcester, their public school districts are so, needy. They have, I mean, look at Boston, look at the industry that's in there, look at the buildings. I mean, you would think they would have an elite public school. I mean,
Well,
what
they
is
have a
it?
very different population, like the students I get from the cities like Chelsea and
Yeah,
the Lynn and the Boston, they're tough kids.
oh, I know.
Teachers also get paid a lot more for Boston too.
Oh, yeah,
We
they
charge
do.
like 100.
But they're not, but still, you
know.
would think they would have all what they need.
But it does vary by school in where you are in Boston.
Absolutely.
My brother went into a substitute teaching at school, showed up in a jacket and tie, and they were amazed that he showed up in a jacket and tie to teach in their school.
I know.
I mean, honestly, when we start to look at it, our urban areas are in, you know, they're in drastic need of a lot of things. I mean, we still have 12 towns that dump sewage in that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you can't, schools and maybe, you know, it's just, they're so far behind in fixing all infrastructure and all the things that have decayed. So, I don't know what the
Yeah.
answer is, but
Yeah,
there's
no,
not
it's
enough money in the world
No.
to fix it.
There
Yeah,
isn't.
yeah, and it's a need, and we've said this over and over again, every time you argue out against this, and I'm in any kind of state audience, it's hard to say, we have needs too. It's not to say that the Lawrences and the Chelseas and the Springfields and the Methuens don't need it, of course they do. They were we were talking about transporting kids up and down the sides of mountains out in the western part of the state. It's a need that we don't understand, but it doesn't mean our needs aren't real. And, you know, it goes back to that chart. I mean, the basic message in the Student Opportunity Act is the chart we've been looking at and updating over the last 5-6 years, where you see the town's assessments and the state, what do you call it, chapter 70, separating. That's, the Student Opportunity Act says, yeah, that's how it should be. You were getting too much before. We're just staying status quo. Because again, if we were not held harmless, and we got what the formula says, we would lose $4 million. So it's, again, goes back to step 2, which there's a study, we'll see how much
Well,
you are
I'm
and does he come out with.
preaching that at the Massachusetts Selectmen's Association, to those people, and they're listening, the selectmen are listening. So cause I was at another meeting in the South Shore, and I heard some gentleman stand up and say, I was at this meeting in Boston, and this woman from, I think she was from the North Shore, she said blah, 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 and he repeated everything I said, and he was concerned. And he didn't know it was me, I was in
That
Sharon.
woman from the North Shore.
Yeah, I think she was from a town from the North Shore. And he's like, well, she was really worried about this, and I think she's right, is what he said, and I'm like, yeah, you should be worried.
Love it.
I think he was from Acton.
Marissa, does this money actually really change the amount of the budget that the state has that is earmarked for schools?
Yes.
Does it-
significantly.
Can you, I mean, if it was 22% before, does it go to like 24 or 28? You know, it's a tough question.
Yeah, I don't know how it'll change, and part of the reason for that is because they're probably going to do a transportation infusion here as well. So everything's gonna shift, I think. But yeah, we'll know more next year.
But when we look at the state and we look at the cost of education throughout the state, you know, the state's budget and what they contribute to education, for the reasons they probably feel strongly about, it's not a lot.
Mhm.
So it's not gonna solve all the problems that we can talk about. It's just not dedicating that, it all goes to medical and everything else. So,
Yeah, but still, I think Massachusetts is the only state in the union that has in their constitution, our state constitution, that our children are to be provided a fair and adequate public education.
it doesn't mean they have to pay for it.
Well, if it's their right in the constitution,
Yeah, it does mean the towns and the cities are supposed to provide the education.
well,
I will say too, and this is one of the things I struggle with, is that when you talk to people who are in Worcester, who are in Chelsea, they talk about the number of students in a classroom. And I think for us, if we took away sports fees and took away activity fees and had to pay for that all out of the district budget, if we paid for the tuitions for full day kindergarten that the families are paying toward the district, like all of that is sort of a hidden cost that has to some degree cushioned us from having 30 kids or 35 kids in a classroom, but it's a hidden cost because it's not, when you talk to people from Chelsea and Worcester, they don't even know that our families are paying those costs, and they're aghast that there are fees like that out there. And they say, well, but you're keeping your low-income kids from playing sports. And we do have waivers, but they're right. There are kids that cannot swing those fees who don't qualify, and there are kids that simply can't get transportation to get to those sports because they have our families that are working 2 or 3 jobs, or they have other extenuating circumstances. And those costs are kind of hidden in our communities. People don't see those costs. And that's something that I'm always thinking about too when we're having those conversations, is just the breadth of opportunity versus what's actually existing in an individual classroom.
I was trying to find the figure. It's something like 16 point something billion that's spent on pre-K through 12 education now, and it's increasing by 1.4 in the Chapter 70 portion of that. There's another 90,000 or 90 million, bringing it up to almost 1.5 billion. But yeah, I mean it's a significant increase as a percentage in the overall state spending. So again, huge win. We're putting more money into
Well,
education.
that's
where
what,
are they getting it from?
that's what everyone's gonna do.
Absolutely, right? Just like we've been hearing for the last 20 years. Big win. I put, Governor, I put in $178 million new dollars. I put $228 million new dollars. Hoorah! We got $67,000.
Record breaking.
Record breaking.
Record breaking. I
Yeah.
like saying that. Record
Banner
breaking.
year.
Yeah.
So.
And they're getting it because we already have excess revenues. So that's the theory, right? Is like they're funding over the supplemental budget right now, and how much is they're gonna bring the state reserves over $3 billion. It's literally because they can pay off everything, they can put extra money toward new programs, and they still have this huge chunk of cash to put into reserves right now because the economy is so good.
Well, and the bottom line is, where's the 3 of our towns have, on average, a $20 million a year budget? And we have a school district that's an average sized school district, and they're a $42 million a year budget. If the whole cost of our school district shifted on the 3 towns, we wouldn't have a school, or we wouldn't have police, or we wouldn't have fire, or we wouldn't have, we cannot. So, I mean, it really gets me angry.
And that's one of the things they say is you're paying 16% over minimum, your minimum requirement. We're paying that to keep level services in our schools. That's what's kept us from having 35 kids in a classroom, that and fees and everything else. But that doesn't mean that we have 16% to spare, right? We have 16% that we put the burden back on the taxpayers for.
Right.
Yes, they said yes, and yes, we're grateful for that. But it's not like that money is just, excess money that's sitting in our communities.
Right, and because of Prop 2.5, you can't just tax the taxpayer or the property owner. You just can't do it.
Well, pro-education people are gonna continue to be pro-education. It's the people that are against education, you're not, paying a lot for education. And you're not gonna change them either, but it's sometimes the people in the middle, the people in your town that really haven't formed an opinion. And that's where probably these meetings are very effective. And they're just, and we've gotta somehow craft a message that, all the issues are being addressed, cause they'll go right to declining enrollment. And they're gonna ask you, well, why isn't it less? So, like I said, in any of the major issues, like for me, I'm a hunter and a sportsman, it's always the people that are totally against, we're never gonna change it, and it's the people in the middle. You're gonna have these people in our towns that wanna have it explained to them. And I mean, I say, well, the cost of food, everything, but that doesn't quite carry enough water. So the more, you have someone like yourself explaining how this doesn't really filter down to us, things are kind of status quo, we're still fighting the fight to
It's still
maintain
gonna be
good
a fight.
education.
Because I think that, no matter, the people that I hear that are like, well, we can't afford to pay more, it's not that they're not pro-education, although you have some that are. I think it's really, I can't afford to
It's the
pay my
ability to
rent.
pay.
I
It's
mean,
the
our,
ability to
our,
pay.
cost of living and.
I think I mean it that way, cause I
Right.
understand that
Right.
as an obvious, part of the equation, but there's some people that actually have pretty good incomes and they just don't have kids in the school system and they don't wanna pay
But when
anymore.
you have a failing school system, school district,
Yeah,
your
most people see
property
your property
values
values
will
go down.
decline and they'll start to slide.
Yeah.
So they get hit in the wall one way or the other,
That's
over time.
That's a tough battle.
over time.
That's a tough battle.
And then if you're wealthy enough, you put your kid in
Although then
private
their
school, doesn't
taxes
matter
go
anyway.
Well, that's,
Yeah.
that, there's so many kids that are in private schools in our town.
Yeah.
So,
Non-admissions also.
I mean, if you have kids in school, you're obviously gonna want, money, spent on education. If you don't, if you're retired or that, then you start looking at other, you have a different perspective. That's really what it comes down to.
and then when
I mean,
the roads don't get
Yeah.
plowed and the police aren't there when you need them, and the fire department
Doesn't
is
show up.
inadequate,
Yeah.
and that's the fight that is hard to reconcile.
Well, to me, it looks like everyone has said their piece.
Be chairing?
I am
Thank you.
sure.
Substitute chairing.
Substitute, yes. I mean, Brian did most of it.
Good plan. I like that plan. I try to do that myself.
Just one comment that I don't know if everybody's heard, but we certainly we voted the tax rate Monday night, and we have a 90-cent increase. And that's
Oh, yeah, that was the headlines in the newspaper. They know how to really get people going on
You'll have to build a racetrack.
Thanks, Jeff.
That was a huge headline, that.
It was. It really was. It's just
It's the
amazing
bill to
what
pay
gets
for fiber.
people.
Police and fire station.
So it will come off eventually. It's a debt explosion.
Well, eventually, yeah.
Yeah,
I won't be
20.
around eventually.
I think it's usually 20 on the bond.
Yeah.
And you can't explain the fact to people that our infrastructure is 70 and 80 years old.
Right.
And you've gotta replace it. And if we'd actually been, if we could have got the town to be more fiscally responsible, we would have, little by little, we would have been doing it, but it doesn't seem like that.
Sadly.
Great.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, to be 26 again.
I'll give it the age.
Oh, okay.
A few more lips, a few times.
So,
All right.
the
Let's
elementary
adjourn.
school.
Thanks.
At least, fire-